Beginning in October 1940, men between 21 and 35 were drafted for military service, and on December 11, 1941, the U.S. declared war against Japan's allies, Germany and Italy. As their husbands, sons, and brothers left home, many American women asked, "How about us?" Early in 1941, Congresswoman Edith Nourse Rogers of Massachusetts met with General George C. Marshall, the Army's Chief of Staff, and informed him that she intended to introduce a bill to establish a Women's Army Corps, separate and distinct from the existing Nurse Army Corps. Rogers remembered the female civilians who had worked overseas with the Army under contract and as volunteers during World War I as communication specialists. Because these women had served the Army without official benefit of status, they had to obtain their own food and quarters, and they received no legal protection or medical care. Upon their return home, they were not entitled to the disability benefits or pensions available to the U.S. military veterans. Rogers was determined that if women were to serve again with the Army in wartime theater, they would receive the same legal protection and benefits as their male counterparts. As public sentiment increasingly favored the creation of some form of women's corps, Army leaders decided to work with Rogers to devise and sponsor an organization that would constitute the least threat to the Army's existing culture. Although Rogers believed the Women's Corps should be a part of the Army so that women would receive equal pay, pension, and disability benefits, the Army did not want to accept women directly into its ranks. The final bill represented a compromise between the two sides. The Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, or WAAC, was established to work with the Army for the purpose of making available to the national defense the knowledge, skill, and special training of women of the nation. The Army would provide up to 150,000 auxiliaries with food, uniforms, living quarters, pay, and medical care. Women officers would not be allowed to command men. The director of WAAC was assigned the rank of major. WAAC first, second, and third officers served as the equivalents of captains and lieutenants in the regular Army, but received less pay than their male counterparts of a similar rank. For example, although the duties of WAAC first officer were comparable to those of a male captain, she received pay equivalent to that of a male first lieutenant. Enlisted women, referred to as auxiliaries, were ranked in descending order from a chief leader, a position comparable to a master sergeant in the regular Army, through junior leader, comparable to a corporal, and down to auxiliary, comparable to private. Although the compromised WAAC bill did not prohibit auxiliaries from serving overseas, it failed to provide them with overseas pay, government life insurance, veterans medical coverage, and death benefits granted regular Army soldiers. If WAACs were captured, they had no protection under existing international agreements covering prisoners of war. Rogers' purpose in introducing the WAAC bill had to be obtain pay, benefits, and protection for women working with the military. She achieved some of her goals, and many compromises had been necessary to get the bill onto the floor. Rogers introduced her bill in Congress in May 1941, but it failed to receive serious consideration until after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December. General Marshall's active support and congressional testimony helped the Rogers bill through Congress. Marshall believed that the two-front war in which the United States was engaged would cause eventual manpower shortage. The Army could ill afford to spend the time and money necessary to train men in essential service skills, such as typing and switchboard operations, when highly skilled women were already available. Marshall and others thought that women were naturally suited to certain critical communication jobs which, while repetitive, demanded high levels of manual dexterity. They believed men tended to become impatient with such jobs and might take careless mistakes which could be costly during the war. Congressional opposition to the bill centered around Southern congressmen. With women in the armed services, one representative asked, who will then do the cooking, the washing, and the mending, and the humble homely tasks to which every woman has devoted herself, and who will nurture the children. After a long debate which filled 98 columns to the Congressional Record, the bill finally passed the House to 249 to 86. The Senate approved the bill at 38 to 27 on May 14th. When President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the bill into a law the next day, he set a recruitment goal of 25,000 for the first year. WAAC recruiting topped that goal by November, at which point Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson authorized the WAAC enrollment at 150,000, the original ceiling set by Congress. The day the bill became the law, Stimson appointed Oveta Kolpabee as director of the WAAC. As chief of the Women's Interest Section in the Public Relations Bureau at the War Department, Hobby helped shepherd the WAAC bill through Congress. She had impressed both the media and the public when she testified in favor of the WAAC bill in January. In the words of Washington Times-Herald, Mrs. Hobby has proved that a competent, efficient woman who works longer days than the sun does not need to look like the idea of a competent, efficient woman. Prior to her arrival in Washington, Hobby had had 10 years' experience as editor of a Houston newspaper. The individual selected had to be politically astute with an understanding of how things got done in Washington and in the War Department. Most important, the director of the WAAC had to show a skeptical American public that a woman could be a lady and serve as a member of the armed forces at the same time. This was a crucial success of the WAAC. Oveta Kolpabee believed very strongly in the idea behind the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. Every auxiliary who enlisted in the Corps would be trained in a non-combat military job and thus free man for combat. In this way, American women could make an individual and significant contribution to the war effort. In frequent public speeches, she explained, the gaps a woman will fill are those in non-combat jobs, where women's hands and women's hearts fit naturally. WAACs will do the same type of work in which women do in civilian life. They will bear the same relation to men of the Army that they bear to the men of civilian organizations in which they work. In Hobby's view, WAACs were here to help the Army win the war, just as women had always helped men achieve success. The Women's Army Corps was successful because its mission, to aid the United States in time of war, was part of the national effort that required selfless sacrifice from all Americans. The war effort initiated vast economic and social changes and altered the role of women in American society. And although the women who joined the WAAC considered themselves in the Army, technically they were civilians working with the Army.